The NR200 was a case from Cooler Master that I was so happy with that I actually ran out and bought several of these. Some of you I was helping on the forum. Some of you were just randos that were like, hey, I like the look of that. Let's actually do it. Cooler Master did a version with and without, bundled power supply and cooling. It's really awesome. And this was also one of the ones where I did my M.2 cheat codes to put a U.2 Optane drive in the front of these, a 2.5-inch PCIe storage device. Right in the front, because you got two 2.5-inch bays. It's meant for SATA. But you could do other things with it. And this was also a small form factor case that was not super unpleasant to build in. Well, Cooler Master is trying to one-up themselves. And they sent me the NCore 100 Max and said, what do you think? Well, let's unbox and find out what I think. The Max version of this case means that it comes with bundled cooling and a bundled power supply. In our case, 850 watt. I've also reviewed the Cooler Master 1100 watt SFX power supply, and Cooler Master really knows what they're doing with these small form factor power supplies. I've been very happy with what I've got set up here. This is also a small form factor case that directly boasts that it's capable of housing giant 4-slot GPUs like a 4090. Alright, it comes with a build guide manual, which you can always check out the PDF version of online. You should definitely do that if you're planning a build around this. This is 212 millimeters by 155 millimeters. It's designed to be used vertically, but you could use it horizontally. It has an expanded mode where you can use it at 172 millimeters across, so you can give yourself more room. It stands 481 millimeters tall. As this is the one with built-in cooling, we do have enough cooling stuff for LGA Intel 1700, 115X and 1200 as well, and also the AMD AM4/AM5 mounting solution. It is, of course, designed for ITX motherboards. And for CPU cooling, it uses an AIO with the radiator mounted in the top. But it is a very, very thick radiator. In the installation manual, it has an A, B, or C for your GPU installation. Basically, if your GPU is smaller than 337 millimeters long and less thick than 62 millimeters, you're good to go. If it's longer than 337 millimeters or thicker than 62 millimeters, you want to look at configuration B or C for maximum GPU support. This reconfigures the inside a little bit and actually makes the case a little bit thicker. And that's what changes the dimensions from 155 millimeters wide to 172 millimeters wide. The Cooler Master accessory case, you get the breathable mesh top, thermal mounting paste, zip ties, motherboard standoffs, modular cables for your power supply, dual 8-pin, plus peripheral, plus an extra CPU header. This looks like it's thick for our expanded installation option. Boom. Right there's where your motherboard rear I/O is meant to be, and GPU I/O on the bottom. Unlike a lot of vertical cases that sort of smash your GPU against the table, this seems like you're going to have enough room to get your DisplayPort cables out at a right angle. For the front panel connection, we've got 2 Type A ports and 1 Type C, as well as a combo headphone microphone jack. Normal, expanded. This is a toolless design. Basically, it's corner to corner. So if you need it to be thicker, you just move the corners apart, and you have a little bit more of a gap. And that's really the secret. It's design genius, really. So if you need a little bit more room, you just move the foot out a little bit, and you end up with a little bit of a hollow space, but that will let your GPU breathe a little better. And also give you more than 3 slots of room. To make it easier to work on, you've also got this removable bracket, which locks and unlocks, so you can pop it out and work on it. The power supply and the cooling comes pre-installed. And the radiator is this thick part up here that's the fan and the radiator. Look at that chimney. It's designed to exhaust air out the top, but it also will suck air in from this side. And then, of course, the power supply also pulls air in. Now, the 850-watt version of this comes with the 450-watt NVIDIA-style RTX connector, the 16-pin power cable. I'm told that the 1000-watt version has the 600-watt connector. So if you're going to run the 4090 at 600 watts, remember the 4090 out-of-the-box power profile is not 600 watts, it's 400 watts. So 450 watts will do a stock 4090, but overclocking is an option. Then 850 watt would be fine. especially if you're going to go with an AMD platform, which uses about 100 watts less at the wall. But if you're going to build a 13 or 4900K and you go 1,000 watts and overclock 4090, this platform can do it, at least by the numbers on paper. Now, if you were considering this as a building block for something like, our minis forum machines, if you were going to go with something like this, the 13900HX, everything is built in here. It's also got the cooling, so you don't need the giant radiator in the top. Maybe you could go with the non-max version of the NR200. This is pre-release, so that might not be a thing yet. But hey, there's also the NR200 versus the NR100 Max, which, you can get without a power supply and cooling. So this is a pretty good building block. This is all it is. All you gotta do is add a GPU. So that's the Minis Forum AR900i. You could also check out the BD770, which is the AMD version of the same. 24 cores. Well, 16 efficiency cores and 8 performance cores. Pretty nuts. But that's all that is. This is more... I want something with a little more horsepower in an ITX form factor. So we're going to have to do a build and see how it does. In terms of the idea and where Cooler Master is going, they're trying innovative things. It's a computer case. It's a box. I love to see companies take risks and try innovative things. And this is certainly clever. It's a good idea. And it's a small PC, but it's also a large PC, which means that it's easy to work on. The only thing really missing is a handle, and that could probably be added as a mod, or, 3D printing accessory maybe? But hey, alright, let's get a build done. Another really nice thing about a build like this is that the cables are already pre-routed and pre-installed for you. I mean, look, this power supply comes bundled with a CPU cable that's this long. If you bought this power supply by itself, you'd have to get a custom sleeved cable or custom cables made that are this length. But this is exactly the perfect appropriate length for 99.9% of ITX motherboards in this form factor. And yes, you do get a longer cable. There's an accessory cable in case you're the 0.01% that has something that doesn't fit. You can still use the longer cable and it's fine, but the cables are already pre-routed and pre-installed. Huge time saver. It's cheat mode, basically, for small form factor building. That's also code if you're running a small computer shop and you want to build like something that's cool looking with RGB underglow and you don't actually want to put a lot of effort into it. Alright, so for this build, we need a motherboard. The motherboard that I've picked is the Aorus B650i. This is a pretty solid AM5 ITX motherboard. I've been using this for, since the launch day pretty much. It has been pretty solid and reliable. I've got the, it's just a giant stack of M.2s here, the weird right angle front panel audio connector. Like, Gigabyte's done a lot of clever engineering here to cram as many ports as possible. USB-C, 5 gigabit USB, there's even breakout headers for USB 2.0 ports so you can have more internal peripherals. There's breakout cables for 4-pin fan headers because there's not physically room for 4-pin fan headers. Check out my full review. Not a lot has really changed there. It's also got QFlash Plus, so if there's new APUs coming out, you can just flash them with the flash thing and get it to work even if the motherboard doesn't have post support for it. So there's a lot to like on this motherboard. But really, it was kind of a toss-up. There's not a lot of ITX motherboards to choose from for AM5. The other one, and this really was down to a coin toss, was the B650 PG ITX from Phantom Gaming. I also reviewed this one separately, but in the end, for this specific build, the Aorus won out. This motherboard can also handle the 7950X or the 7950X 3D, and with this cooling solution, it's probably fine. Certainly more fine than a 13900K running full tilt, because even though this is a thick radiator, you're not the 300 watts on that CPU. It's better than a 120. It's better than a 140. Is it better than a 240? It's like two 240s folded over on one another with the high static pressure fans. Comes with thermal paste and all the mounting stuff for all the different kits, as I mentioned. You never know what kind of CPU you're going to have. Not going to work if you throw in a Deck Alpha, I'll tell you that. Look at all this packing material just for your CPU cooler. They really are masters of the cooler. Because of their experience with shipping and configuration. Never mind! The one slightly worrying aspect of this is that you have a pre-made front panel header. And so this will work with a standard style front panel header, but this Aorus motherboard does not have a standard style front panel header. Now, if you'll notice, there's only 4 wires going into the front panel header, and one of them has a little stripe on it. The first 2 are the power LED, plus and minus, and then your power button for shorting it out. So they're right side by side. It's not very convenient having it in this connector, and it would be okay for Cooler Master to have this, but I think that you would need a breakout cable to convert this back into 2-pin headers. So basically just a little extension cable would solve this problem, like 3 cents of plastic. It's not really a huge deal. It's not a huge deal for me because I got the parts on hand to make this, but this would be super annoying if you were in this situation in this build, because the front panel connector here isn't quite what it should be. And it's just because the front panel connector here, Gigabyte didn't have enough physical room for this, so the slight compatibility issue. At least until I find the bag that the case came with in the first place. It's like, oh, here's your front panel adapters, which could be on me. You can also see our breakout cable at the back here and how that works with the PCIe slot. Like I say, 3 slots just right out of the box. But you can make the case wider if you need a 4th slot, or room as if you had a 4th slot. The other thing I like about this, it gives you some accessibility. All of your motherboard I/O is very, very accessible at the rear, and it's just the GPU I/O that's coming out of the bottom. If you were going to use a monster GPU like our OC formula, well, it fits like a glove in the default configuration. If you're using something decidedly more pedestrian like a 4070, yeah, it's going to fit. If you are using the 4070, it physically moves that 16-pin connector, which is why I selected that for this build, at least for the first part of this. It's a really tight fit with the right angle there. It would almost be better to have a straight-in connector, but that's only because I'm using a 4070. If I'm using a 4090, the situation changes. The right angle connector makes sense for the 4090, so something to keep in mind if you're using NVIDIA GPUs. If you're using the ASRock Formula OC, it doesn't matter because it uses standard 8-pin power connections. So that's a little bit of an advantage in this situation. Let's grab the 4090. Yeah, the 4090 is quite a bit larger. Technically, the 4090 is also just a 3-slot card. The aftermarket cards are more than 3 slots. There's also the 4090D, which is physically the same, just cut down a little bit in terms of functionality. I'd probably still run it in the 4-slot configuration, just to have a little bit more room for air to move around. But look, you've got fresh air intake there. It's so nice. And now with the 4090, you can see that the right angle connector is much more reasonable because it's physically positioned at the cutout near the top of the case. Now, the other thing to consider is on this 4090, the back of the 4090 gets very hot, and your PCIe wires are mashed directly against a thing that is known to get to about 90 degrees C. I'm not super happy about that, but that's not a technical fault. That's just something that I wish there was a little bit more airflow around the back of the GPU. But we'll test it. We'll see how it does. I actually seem to have reasonably okay cable clearance for cables that come out of the GPU and immediately take a right angle to go backward. For the RAM, I'm going to go with some ADATA XPG A6000, AX5U6000, because it was on sale. Hey, it's booting. If you don't have a working power button, you can always go into the BIOS and set it to always come on when it loses power, as I have done here before I make my adapter cable. Remember, little top, big top, depending on which way you want to do it. It's impressively quiet for idle, but let's do some benchmarks. Well, it's reasonable out-of-the-box cooling and reasonable cooling on our RTX 4090. I was a little surprised that the RTX 4090 was running as cool as it was, especially around the memory, but you can see from the hardware info 64, those 4090s, they run kind of warm. If you're going to do a Team AMD build with this, I think you're going to be a little bit better off in terms of your cooling configuration, because remember, the fan here in the top that is exhausting out the back is basically pulling air directly over your GPU. So if you've got a traditional, triaxial cooler or something like this, setup is probably going to work a little bit better. I really think I should retest this with the 4-slot wide configuration, making the case a little bit wider. But I knew that you'd probably want to see the first initial default configuration to see how that goes. But for an AM5 build running full tilt with a 4090, this is an impressive setup. And aside from my little snafu with the front panel thing. I'm not sure. I mean, just a 2-pin extension header or two 2-pin extension headers would make that problem go away. So that's really the biggest downside if you're going to go for a small form factor build. Of course, if you're going for a small form factor build, the motherboards cost more. You have to be a little bit more cognizant of this, that, and the other. But this case coming with a power supply and competent AIO cooling, well, the aesthetic certainly is interesting, and the approach from Cooler Master is interesting, and I appreciate that. And Wendell, this is level 1. This has been a quick look at the NC100, new from Cooler Master. It delivers what it promises. It's a pretty competent ITX case. It's not the smallest ITX case in the world, but it is very easy to build in and very easy to work with, and provides pretty stunning aesthetics and results. Overall, I'm happy with it. I'm Wendell, this is level 1. I'm signing out. You can find me in the level 1 forums.